Good morning, West Virginia. Can you hear me okay? Oh, good. Good. Can we all give it up for Carrie Hope Richmond one more time? Thank you all for inviting me here this morning and inviting me back. It's always nervous when you speak to somebody and then you think, I wonder if that was okay. But I've been back 3 times, so far so good. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you because you inspire me with each visit, and you're truly moving to be the model for the nation. And I can truly tell you that. I think I've been in every state. You're a model for the most vulnerable children and youth. I was thinking about the topic I'm supposed to speak on. Hope I don't mess that up, Greg, but lots has happened nationally and here in West Virginia. About 3 years ago, I visited Chestnut Mountain Ranch. I was a believer that the answer to ending poverty lies with quality education, opportunity, and dreams as identified by those we are serving, whether adults in poverty, whether kids in foster care, whether aged out alumni. And when I was at Chestnut Mountain Ranch, I saw the finest education, amazing opportunities for the young boys who were either in foster care or for those who could end up in foster care if things didn't work. I saw dedication, determination, excellence, and faith, all moving in action. A year earlier, in 2019, I had started the All In Challenge because a friend who had been serving at an orphanage in another country was asked why the heck she was there when her own system in the US was so messed up. She came back, she told me about this, and the All In for America's Children Challenge began. We decided it was time to start a movement to change the culture for children, to value all of America's children, and to enhance the trajectory to success for each and every child. Whether you are passionate about early education, you're all in for 0 to 5. Whether you are a teacher helping children exceed 3rd grade test scores for reading and math, you're all in. Whether you are a coach that is trying to help children, or for loving the parentless, fatherless, homeless, or those abused and neglected, you are all in for children. It is not hard to be all in, but we need to go there together. We were and are still hoping that each and every person in this great country can define how they are all in for children. We are hoping that all athletes, entertainers, teachers, preachers, business leaders, journalists, politicians, parents, everyone will focus on being all in to ignite a path of success with passion and ideas filled with love for children and a vision for the future. This vision is for America and will go throughout the world. We in this country can change how we serve children. We can change how we treat children. And when we do that, generations are changed. So I came and I visited West Virginia to ask the governor to be all in, as well as to visit Chestnut Mountain Ranch. While at the ranch, I had the opportunity to meet with nonprofit agencies and faith-based entities. 13 pastors showed up, and I was thinking, West Virginia, this is interesting. 13. Family members, youth, and other leaders who were in attendance. I did get a chance to speak about James 1:27 ministry, about giving America's children a chance at safe, loving homes, but about doing this together. I met with Pastor Josh Rhodes, who had been extremely moved by the discussion, somewhat emotional, wouldn't you say, Josh? And he took the message to care for the widow and the orphan very seriously. With the support of Pastor Tim and the church, they began a foster care ministry. In fact, Pastor Josh walked his talk, and he became a foster parent. He didn't have to do that, but he did. And the church created care communities, and they wrapped around Pastor Josh. And then they started being foster parents, and the rest is history. Still happening. We're still writing the book. But because Steve Finn and his family put their yes on the table for Christ and fought to care for troubled boys because a church in Morgantown put their yes on the table and began a ministry for fostering children, more than 150 people attended the second all-in meeting. 13, 150, and then this. This is impressive. Look at this audience. And if you look around the state, from the governor's office down, everybody is getting involved. Your community, West Virginia, thank you for putting your yes on the table for all children and youth, longing for calm, peace, and a loving home, and to keep their precious things. So what does this have to do with national information? That is what I'm actually here to talk about, and the faith-based movement. During the All In Challenge, I talked to 40 governors, more than 40, and I asked them to be all in for America's kids. And then, what happens when you work for an administration? You leave. And what next was, what do I do to put my yes on the table? So I chose to be all in for individuals who didn't find permanency in our child welfare system. I chose to empower the voices of those who have aged out of foster care. I chose to lift up their voices to help improve a system that shaped their childhood memories. And I chose, rather than to comfortably retire, and my husband's sitting there going, yep, that's what happened, to begin a nonprofit, All In, Fostering Futures, to continue the movement. And I hope all of you will choose to be all in and join in this movement too. As I said, while in DC, I had the great opportunity to meet and find over 40 governors who were all in for America's children. At the same time, when I met with each governor, I asked them to put together a panel of 5 to 10 aged out alumni, because I knew they'd tell me the truth of what happened to them in foster care, good and bad. And they certainly do, and they're still telling me, and it's awesome. But so what are we dealing with? There are over 400,000 children in the US foster care system. At that time I was talking to governors, there were 127,000 children whose parental rights had already been terminated, and they were waiting for that forever home, waiting for that next step. Some don't want to be adopted, but they could have guardianships. They could have really close relationships. But they were just sitting there, and they just wanted every day to wake up and say, somebody wants to adopt me. They waited, and then we found out that almost 30% of these kids were in the home that wanted to adopt them or make it permanent, but they were waiting for court action, or they were waiting for paperwork. Now I thought, you don't have to have a master's in social work to do the paperwork. You don't actually have to be a judge. You could be in the legal profession to sign the papers so the adoption will go through. 30%, think about if caseworkers are here, if that was off your caseload. Every day when a child goes to bed at night, even in the home that they are going to be adopted in, they lay there wondering if they're going to have to leave their precious things and move to another home because they've moved so often. So when I talk about this, it's about kids need permanency. They need to know that this is real because they've been moved and moved. They've lost their precious things over and over again. So it's not just paperwork. It's the real deal. We need to close that 30% because those kids deserve it, and our caseworkers are overburdened. So how do we do that, whether it's hiring a different professional to get those last things done? And one last piece on that, as I interviewed people across the state, one court system told me, we only do adoptions if there's an opening in our dockets, and that's rare. Well, the waiting child doesn't care about how busy your docket is. Let's get them their home, and you don't have to get on a docket. There are other ways to do this. So just, that's my pet peeve, so I'm sorry I went off script. I also heard from so many child welfare agencies as I traveled the country that we are not adoption agencies. And I get that. But we remove kids in crisis, we put them in our system to keep them safe, and then we have more crisis, so we remove kids from crisis and we put them in our system to keep them safe. Where's the back end? Is that priority on the back end as critical as the crisis on the front end? And it's like if you're gonna have a heart attack, you don't wait till it happens because you're gonna just keep dealing with the crisis of the heart attack. So that's really, really important. What can we do better? Can we do the back end better? And I've seen it done in a couple states. So of the 127,000 children, and the youth. 20,000 of those young people will age out of the foster care system. I don't understand that at all because we should be not doing that. But 1 in 4 of those adults will experience homelessness by age 24. 71% of young women are pregnant by age 21, and in some cases, that is a good way to grow your own family. Nearly 1 in 3 are involved with the criminal justice system, and by age 24, only half are employed. 58% will graduate from high school, and fewer than 1% will graduate from college. You're going to meet some of those 1%ers today later. But 1 in 4% experience serious PTSD, and I've been told sometimes it's worse than a veteran in combat. We have to do better. We cause some of our own trauma when we move kids from placement to placement to placement. Attachment matters. So unfortunately, I do have to add one more thing that I think is critical. Everybody in the country is dealing with this. West Virginia, you're not exempt. Fentanyl, opioids, meth, other drugs are leaving many children orphaned. These drugs are also being used by children and youth. In 2021, West Virginia had the highest rate of fentanyl overdose deaths. Good news is that recent data shows that's going down. But although those numbers are going down, we can't stop working on this. This issue is decimating communities, and it's not a separate issue from child welfare. This is a root cause that struggles for the struggles you all experience in child welfare. So I would ask that in addition to joining the movement to work on child welfare, that you study, you address, and you do everything humanly possible that you can do to stop the scourge of drugs on your communities. Again, this isn't just West Virginia, but it does impact your systems. While in DC, I also learned that 60% of kids are removed from their homes because of the consequences of poverty. So with that information, the challenge began. So let me talk a minute about that. When we talk about the consequences of poverty, it's the mental health. You lose your home, you get stressed, then you get depressed, and then you go use a little bit of drugs here or maybe some marijuana there, and you go here, and next thing you know, someone said, I don't think they're taking care of their kids. So child welfare comes in, not in negative intentions, but these kids might be at risk, so then the kids go, leaving behind their precious things, and we wonder, could something have happened better? Could there be some intervention on that front end? When she lost her job and then was losing her home, could we have wrapped around that? Was there a way to prevent a foreclosure, or was there a way to make sure food was in the refrigerator and it didn't have to be the government? I think there is. And I think that, church, that's, I think, a role that we need to have. And that's really critical, because if we could stop 60% of kids being removed, caseworkers, wouldn't you imagine how great your caseloads might be? It would be so much better because we could do so much more work with kids and families and communities if we weren't overloaded. And caseworkers are, especially right now. So I truly believe that what you focus on gets done. I challenged the governors. I started with Rhode Island, Louisiana, Kansas, Oregon, Washington State. You ought to, just to make it really exciting, you ought to call up Washington State and say, hey, I'm from the Trump administration. No, they really talked to me. So it was really fun. And so they were all in for kids. And I did all the Republican governors. And I met all the kids in all the states. And New Hampshire got down to 36 waiting kids. 36. Now, they're a small state, but we'll start with that. Oklahoma got down to under 400 waiting kids. They had a consent decree because they weren't getting kids out of their system waiting 400 kids. Now, what they did also with the 400, they got rid of things like the Heart Gallery, everything that you would normally see, because these last 400 kids were medically fragile, seriously mentally ill, had siblings, and they didn't want somebody just to come in and say, this kid, I love this kid. They wanted to make sure they could handle the difficulties. So they handpicked the relationships with the child so they could be successful. Under 400 kids, they're still doing it. And then Arkansas, I guess they're a little bit competitive. Arkansas is at 386. They go back and forth. But they hired somebody that said, we are going to have Project Zero and we are going to get to zero. That what you focus on gets done. So we decided that the entire country should just focus on those two things. When I was working in human services as a director, when I was at ACF, someone says, tell me about child welfare, how can we help? And not to be rude, but I would vomit child welfare all over you. And people would say, okay, thanks, I'll pray for you. And it's a lot. Child welfare, if you're in child welfare, you know, there's a lot of expectations, there's a lot of issues. But if you break it down to saying, let's strengthen this family, and let's make sure these kids have forever homes because parental rights are terminated, and that's our focus, we could have a child welfare system in this country that's half its size. And that's what's happening. But now let's talk about why those states, and there are many I haven't mentioned, but why these states have gotten to these really good numbers. We knew that we could get to half. We knew that if we worked with the churches, we could get this done. So I started talking to churches, and I started sending my staff out to talk to churches, and the governor's offices started talking to churches, and we started bringing them to the table. And it was so much fun because then COVID hit, and that was even better. So everything had to be done virtually. Arizona decided that the one thing that couldn't stop were adoptions. They did more adoptions during COVID than even before COVID. They got more kids forever homes, and they were able to follow up, which is real critical to everybody. You have to follow up on adoptions because so many of the young people that have joined our family were adopted and then abused. But no one checked in to see if those adopted parents were doing okay. And one young man, and you'll hear this later, but he was locked in a room for 13 years. He said if one person would have come into that house to bring a meal, they would have seen these locks on the outside of the doors. And he might have been rescued earlier. So we need to have a bigger role than just adoptions because adopting kids who have trauma is tough. So sorry, Greg, I just go off script all the time. So COVID happened, Arizona got a lot of kids adopted, and another state said, we're not gonna do anything until COVID's over. So kids waited. Thousands of kids waited, and they're now on the list to get adopted because now COVID's over. But we have to look at, in the eyes of the kids, it's faces, not cases. Oh my gosh, these kids deserve so much from us. And we are overworked, and we are underpaid, and we are struggling, but we can still do this if we focus. So with the focus on the two areas, we can have healthy, thriving families. We can, on the front end, children in loving homes on the back end. Less time in the system reduces trauma. More time in loving families help healing. Nothing wrong with any of that. Long-term impact of addressing the front end and the back end reduces so many of society's problems, not just child welfare. Reduces domestic violence, unemployment, human trafficking, substance use, mental health, and more. So how do we do this? The solution to all of this is community. Greg used the word connections. Your community, your churches, your state. What if, and you stole my what if, and I was like, he's taking my speech. What if today we respond to the Lord? That just tells you that Greg and I have done too many of these together. Today we respond to the Lord as he asks us to care for the poor, the hungry, the scared, the addicted, the homeless, the abused, and the neglected. And imagine what we can all do as we come forward to change the world together. I'm a firm believer we can. And so we can do this. I have seen amazing faith, motivation, and movement over the last several years. I have watched as Christian Alliance for Orphans, CAFO, has impacted state after state. America's Kids Belong, you saw their video. Promise 686, Focus on the Family, Assemblies of God churches, evangelical churches, Southern Baptist churches, and so many more are coming together around our children, are being all in for families and children. They're being trained in trauma. Critical, critical, critical. We see the failed and disrupted adoptions. It's because we don't have the trauma. In prevention, and are following through with the long-term goal of success for our children. I've seen meals, training, employment, clothes, housing, and more being made accessible because the yes is on the table. I said this earlier. Steve Finn put his yes on the table. The church in Morgantown put their yes on the table. I put my yes on the table. Greg put his yes on the table. That is so critical because you can't be half in. The states who have been successful had church integration and partnership. And in fact, I love this. One university offered to the State Department that they would do a research project because they had master's level social workers. They went and took all the data and identified where the highest level of removals were happening. This data was shared with caseworkers and with churches. Then they plotted how many churches are in each of these areas where the removals happened. And some of those areas were extremely high poverty. So you had one or two churches that maybe they got $5 in a basket on a Sunday. And then you had our mega churches who have the resources, and they got together, and the resource churches helped the churches that were right in the community and that were trusted, and all of a sudden we have a reduction of removals in those communities. It's not rocket science, but it is taking data, doing things strategically, and caring for each and every kid. It's not hard. But you do have to have an end goal of success, beginning with that end in mind, that every child is cared for so they do not have more trauma. It's powerful. But can you imagine turning your community into a life-saving machine where everyone you meet, every agency, every church, business, individual values life, hope, and wellness for families and children? This is a culture to change the trajectory of success for each and every child, each and every family or vulnerable adult, which ultimately will change generations. In fact, this unity would change, I think, the anger and the division in our country today. Our child welfare system is charged with ensuring equitable services for families. These services should prevent child abuse and neglect from occurring. We can help with that. We can keep children safe and with their own families whenever possible. We can help with that. We can ensure timely permanency for children who enter foster care through reunification, adoption, or guardianship. We can do this. But have you noticed that the child welfare system cannot be successful by itself? But child protection is often left alone to address these issues. Mental health, probation, education, public health, substance use treatment facilities, the faith community, nonprofit agencies, and businesses could all have a huge role. Our communities can support families so children do not enter foster care and stay safely in their homes. Our communities can find forever families for every waiting child. Our communities can engage aged-out youth with a support system and faith-based community. Our community can equip churches to support foster and adoptive families. Is there any place in this country where there is a larger audience weekly with the love and serving of hearts than at church? You don't go to the football game and say, hey, can you guys adopt? It doesn't work that way. Well, maybe Carrie would go there because she will go anywhere that has to get things done. So what if we bring this community together to wrap services around families who are in poverty or addicted? What if we could get children who are 3 years old to diploma and beyond and move parents to full self-sufficiency? Sounds like it's not a child welfare issue, but it is. What if we brought non-governmental entities to the table to assist teachers and wraparound parents and to tutor children and to show respect, dignity, and love? These are not hard things. Strengthening families is imperative to the social and economic well-being of our own country, but it is also important for the global community of countries. Church, the successful states are working together to make a difference. Mother Teresa was once asked, what should we do to solve world peace? And she said, go home and love your family. And I read that and I thought, but what if you didn't have one? The work we do together should strive to achieve this seemingly simple goal, that every child may have a safe, loving family to go home to. It also starts with ensuring that families have the resources and supports that they need to thrive. All too often our attention is solely on fixing problems after they have already occurred. Can we prevent things in the first place? Can we shift the culture of our nation to take care of the most vulnerable, to prevent the vulnerability? Prevention takes collaboration between local, state, and federal government, nonprofit agencies, courts, and churches, led by the people we're serving. With all this said, Imagine that nothing is impossible. We can move mountains. We can conquer substance abuse, mental illness, and doubt and fear, and we can look back at miracle after miracle. When we did the worship, we heard this: God is so faithful. He is so, so good. We can look back and see that. Servant leadership, hand in hand with families, is truly unstoppable, unbeatable, no matter who says it can't be done. Together with hope, there is nothing. Hope, hope, hope. It started that way, and we're not going to stop. It can be done. Together with hope, there's no obstacle that is impossible when working to end abuse, neglect, hunger, or fear. Homelessness, unemployment, poverty. And with love, with that hope, nothing's impossible. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." I have a big sign in my office: be the change you wish to see in the world. Hurricane, West Virginia, are you ready to change the world? And are you all in? Everybody stand up and give each other a high five.